Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the next installment of the Talented Learning webinar series. Today's webinar topic is Shiny Penny or Strategic Choice, How to Leverage Learning Content Trends. Your presenters today are myself, John Lay of Talented Learning, and Sam Marsden of OpenSesame. And we'll get into introducing ourselves in just a bit. So square some housekeeping away. Right after this, we'll produce and share the on-demand version of this so you could distribute to your friends and colleagues or watch a second time because it'll be so interesting and information-packed. All throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and submit questions in the questions or comments in the questions window. I'll be monitoring it the whole time. If we can thread them in, we'll thread them in on the fly. Otherwise, we'll follow up individually afterwards to make sure everything gets answered. We've got 3 really strategic polls inside of here that we want you to respond to. We do speed polling at Talented Learning, so we'll pull it up and hurry up and get your answers in there, and we'll use them to help frame the session. And finally, for those of you that are maintaining CAE credits in your professional lives, this live session counts for 1 CAE credit, and just email me afterwards, and I will ensure that you get your credit certificate. So, learning content is a big topic. Now, there's so many buzzwords that come, evolve, and disappear in learning technology. You know, progressive training organizations want to be on the cutting edge, but they don't want to bleed. You know, they want better learning experiences for their learners, yet they don't want to chase shiny objects. And they want to leverage new technologies, but with limited time and budget, there's not a lot of room for choosing wrong. And furthermore, the explosion in the number and diversity of learning systems and the different content capabilities that each of them have further complicate the analysis and build versus buy decisions that anybody managing content for their organization has to worry about. And so, well, that's what we're here to do, is to provide a unique take on learning content today. And we've got a unique matchup of presenter experience to talk about exactly these topics. We're going to first cover a top 10 list of strategic content tools that were prioritized by an open poll on Talented Learning. And we'll show you the results of that, and we'll dig into each one of the 10, and we'll talk about with them. We'll give examples. We'll describe how it impacts buy versus build decision. We'll talk about real-life application of it and how you measure it and how you integrate as we go through these 10. And between Sam and myself, we'll cover it from really 2 different aspects. So let's get ahead and get going. So today's presentation is produced by Talented Learning and is sponsored by our partner, OpenSesame. And Talented Learning is almost a 5-year-old, fiercely independent research, news, and consulting organization dedicated to providing advice to learning technology buyers and sellers. We produce a free weekly content in the form of blogs, webinars, podcasts, and we follow and review now over 175 learning technology providers. And we explore the innovation that's really coming out of every sector of the industry. You know, for our day job, you know, we help buyers define their requirements, shortlist vendors, and take them through a professional buying process. You can find more of our content at talentedlearning.com. I'm John Lay. I'm the CEO and lead analyst and founder of Talented Learning. I got a master's degree in instructional technology almost 23 years ago, and I've been square in the middle of the LMS and e-learning industry ever since that. First working in content development, but pretty much for the last 2 decades now, directly in learning management technology. But when I learned in grad school, I started learning on HyperCard and Authorware, Director Quest. For all you old timers out there, that should make you grin. But ever since that, I've been following content through the lens of learning technology platforms, and that'll be the lens that I'll focus on today. And that's quite different than my esteemed co-presenter and guest today, Samantha Marsden. Samantha is the Senior Marketing Manager of Marketing and of OpenSesame, which is one of the most relevant content learning companies in the world. Sam is an expert and a guru in many things content, and I'll let her give a solid personal and OpenSesame introduction. Welcome, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'm so excited to be here. As John said, I work in marketing at OpenSesame, but my background, I've always been in content. I really started my career building and creating e-learning courses that were specific to the veterinary healthcare industry, actually. And from there was part of building a learning platform, and then transitioned into product marketing in regards to several e-learning platforms. And now at OpenSesame, I do work with customers on, from global organizations on internal communication strategies for their L&D program. So hearing what customers need from OpenSesame and what tools we can give them to be successful is what I was able to bring my experience to OpenSesame to do. And I'm really excited to be here to share my knowledge on all things content and e-learning and curation and more. And a little bit about OpenSesame. We help companies, we offer, as John mentioned, really a comprehensive catalog of e-learning courses, but we actually do more than just provide courses to you, off-the-shelf courses. We work with you, we go in, we find courses you need, we map them to your core competencies, we sync them with your learning management system, and really we support you in every way possible to make your life easier and really increase e-learning utilization by learners. So again, really excited to be working with John on today's topic. It's important to us and to our customers as well, so I'm excited to get started.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks, Sam. Maybe we'll start off with a poll.
Yeah. So the first poll, audience poll number 1, is really just to get to know you. We want to know where do you work with learning content? Is it corporation? Are you at association, academia, a content vendor, or other? And there's, if you're an other, then you can enter it in that question pane that John mentioned earlier. So just a quick poll: corporation, association, academia, content vendor, or other.
Okay, got some others coming in. Let me take a look. Oh, put it in the question pane if you're another.
Yep.
All right, so that's kind of not surprising as for the talented learning audience anywhere, because this is exactly what we see. So we'll show, we got a nice mix here from a registration standpoint. We really had a spread across all of this, but 0% in academia, which isn't surprising since that's probably where we do the least amount of work at Talented Learning. But certainly corporations, both with employee and extended enterprise worries, associations now in the race for continuing education, and really subject matter experts tend to be the most content warriors in my opinion. So, all right, let's go ahead and close that, and we'll take a look. So here's here's the poll that I was talking about. If you go to Talented Learning, we left it open. We're going to leave it open all the way till November, and then we'll sum it up and provide the final results. But we've had a few hundred now at respondents, and we had 18 different topics in this blog post that we came up with that were trendy, shining object or strategic choices for content. And we allowed respondents to go ahead and list their top 5. And then we just measured the top 5 to see exactly what it turned out. And here's how it is. Leading in the pack is content curation. And so guess what? We're going to talk about the top 10 here today as the poll currently stands. And for each of those, we'll share our expertise and what we think is going on in the marketplace, maybe a little history, and we'll go from there. So, Sam, any surprises on this list? Having content curation and personalization commanding the top spots, or that what you would have expected?
No, not really. We do something similar at the start of the year on like top learning technology trends, what people think are going to be hot in the coming year. I am a little surprised to see microlearning as high as it is, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. But the rest of it's pretty typical, I would say, of what I would expect to kind of be on the higher end and what has probably dropped. It'd be interesting to look at results of this poll from even 2 years ago or 3 years ago to see how things have shifted, and what maybe would have been at the top and what maybe would have been at the bottom would be interesting. maybe this can be a yearly poll that you do to kind of measure year to year.
We'll keep expanding it out. I thought,
Yeah.
in addition, what's kind of interesting on the top is what's interesting on the bottom. You know, so much talk about AI in the industry to see, say it's neat, but not quite yet. Same goes with
absolutely.
gamification and simulation. So, you know, after all the hype, that's interesting. But let's get started with content curation. And, you know, Sam, that's your expertise. So why don't you take this one?
Yeah, definitely. This is something I could talk all day about. I won't. But yeah, let's talk about what is content curation and why it's important to use as L&D professionals. I think that we would all agree that we live in a time where information overload is a serious issue. We have more material than we have time, and finding the right information is really getting harder and harder. And when we talk about curation and really what the role of a curator is, which maybe some of you here on the webinar, whether you know it or not, or maybe you have someone else at your organization that does it, you might think of somebody who's in charge of an art collection or at a museum. And that's obviously not what we do in L&D, but there are some similarities. And as a curator, as I put here, you really are sifting and sorting through large amounts of content to present it in a meaningful and organized way. And ultimately, so our audience can derive value from it and then trust us to give them future resources that will make them successful. And I think that really two good examples of this in the real world is Spotify and Netflix. Spotify has reported that 50% of Spotify's 100 million users globally are listening to human-curated playlists. And that cumulatively generates to more than 1 billion plays per week. And Netflix actually reports that 80% of what their members watch comes from Netflix recommendations. So in actuality, these sites benefit from having tremendous choice in music, movies, show, etc., which is similar to OpenSesame. We have 20,000 e-learning courses to choose from, very similar. But think about if Spotify and Netflix didn't curate for us. It's probably safe to say that they would have significantly fewer subscribers and consumption in general. So that's kind of what I like to think of when I'm kind of showing the value of curation in L&D. And John has a great slide here regarding content curation. It has been historically labor-intensive process. It really still is in a lot of ways. There are tools and resources to help you in automation. It's definitely still a labor-intensive process. There is always going to be buy versus build considerations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the webinar. And then the variety of content sources. If you're curating content, different libraries, different, AI, as we talked about a little bit earlier, can identify interest and curate for you. The key here that I want to highlight is about findability when it comes to curation. A real key is how easily and effectively is curated content to find, when, where, and how. Being transparent is really the primary factor here. It helps users understand who is even curating this content for me, what do they know about me that this content is going to be relevant to give me the skill I need or to help advance my career. So a key from my perspective throughout this webinar today will be all about this. It will be all about the accessibility of content to the learner. And John has 5 really great examples here. We won't go through them all, but we have them up here because it's important that as you're beginning the curating process, that there are different methods to look at, and there's different organizing principles to consider that maybe would work for your organization or not work for that organization. And those 5 examples are listed here: aggregation, chronological list, distillation, merge, and elevation. And again, we won't go through those, but just use this webinar as a tool for kind of further considerations as you start the potential curation process or as you're starting to research it. And on this next page, we've built that out a little bit more for those who want to kind of continue exploring content curation methodologies. John will recommend Robin Good as an excellent resource. John, it sounds like you speak highly of his perspective and learning specific applications, and really as the learning technology professional, and build out these different types of curation super maps of ways to curate and considerations to take. I don't know, John, if you have any other additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think just piling on your Spotify or Netflix example of, this is what's going on at the best levels of all these different areas, but not quite so much, or maybe not all the time in learning content. So when you look at the broader aspect of those that are curating content before it became vogue in learning content, you see there's a lot of areas from mapping and distilling and investigating and elevating and what rises to the top, and why that learning organizations are all struggling with and looking to technology for help in a variety of ways, including that 1.25% artificial intelligence.
Yep, absolutely. And if you go to the next slide, John, why not just offer 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 courses available to learners, which is a good thing to do. And the thought of curating through all of that seems overwhelming. But the answer is pretty simple. First and foremost, when you curate content, again, it makes it easy for your learners to find what they're looking for. It's all about that accessibility and the content coming to them. It also really shows your colleagues that you value their time. If you give a colleague 10 courses on one subject and ask them to choose the best one for them and watch it, that is overwhelming. It will likely take them more time, and for you to do it really shows that you value that. Quality preservation, good content curation is all about reviewing the courses, going through every 6 months, every year, pulling out the ones that aren't relevant anymore, putting in new ones. And then in the end, a good learner experience will increase the likelihood that they'll take more courses, and then really build that trust and drive repeat usage. So I really can't stress the importance of this enough, and happy to provide additional resources as needed.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
And so this is really, a lot of times I talk about what an LMS is, and you would think that I could go on for days about it, but really an LMS is something that manages learners and content and the interrelationship between the two. And curation and what we'll see personalization is the other side of making that work well. So initially, kind of like what you said, you download 20,000 courses, into your LMS, and you just unleash that to your employee or your extended enterprise population. And I think HR and training development folks were aghast at how little usage it actually got at the end, until they could really start mandating it, perhaps. But voluntary learner usage until the point of curation and personalization done on a more scientific basis has really been unsuccessful until recently. But the part that I really like to follow is personalization, because I had lived every step of this along the way inside of the learning platforms. And so, from number 2, personalization, we're going to look at it kind of from letting the LMS or the learning platform help make those connections. So let's say that the content has already been curated, so we have a certain amount of content inside the system. Now, how do you get that to the right learners, especially when you have lots of different types of learners in your organization? And so, at first, 15, 20 years ago, the way that learners would be associated with content was basically their user profile, and that consisted of what their name was, so a one-off, what their job title or job role was, or what their organization was. And really between those 3 things, you would line up the content that was either assigned or recommended for each one of those groups. But as you can imagine, that became very limiting and still non-curated or personalized, as you'd still get this massive this massive group. And so then the concept of these dynamic groups were invented in LMSs. And what they are is that where they could use and or Boolean type logics that you could say more than just job title organization, but really anything in the profile. So, how long they've been employed in the company. Are they, a manager? Do they have, so many years? You could take anything and then create groups. And as learners moved in, because of what's being tracked in the HR system, moved in and out of these groups, they would automatically be assigned or non-assigned or recommended content. And so it got a little bit better. And then they started layering in the content habits. So did a user search for a course or take a course or launch a course or complete a course or fail a course or splendidly pass a course, and what courses? And so the LMS started tracking the content habits and folding that in with the dynamic groups so you can start to get really specific on getting the right content to the right folks. And as it matured, then performance reviews, what was your manager or your peers or yourself saying? What are your skill gaps leading to that? And one second. Then that led to, what are you doing from a social standpoint? Are you making comments? Are you liking? Are you posting? Are you tagging content? And now it's evolved to what's being tracked inside the CRM. Are you selling more or selling less? And how many sales opportunities? Or what's your customer turnover rate? All those things, or your customer satisfaction rate, all being worked in together to automatically personalize and deliver content to learners. And so when you watch, I have the advantage of just reviewing and then seeing in-depth presentations from the top learning content providers. What you're seeing is now just new and innovative and increasingly dynamic e-commerce and marketing automation ways to personalize that curated learning content to the next level. And so where we're at in 2018 compared to 1998 is just unbelievable. So it's neat to watch that progress in the platform and how that makes it all relevant. But now as content is getting smaller and smaller pieces, that offers up a whole new consideration. Sam, what do you think about microlearning?
Yeah, so the third trend we're going to talk about is microlearning. And as we all know, we are living in a world of lowering attention spans. You want to purchase an item, there's one click on Amazon. Need to go somewhere, just pull up and call an Uber or Lyft. For reference, to get started, a YouTube video is only watched for the average length of 2.7 minutes. That's from the National Center for Biotechnology Information. 2.7 minutes. So microlearning serves this population by slicing and dicing content and shortening the duration and really accounts for this trigger user, people who are responding to moods or impulses or events. And I'll give an example here in a second because it's really easy and accessible to them. And microlearning, by dissecting these big topics into relevant content that is 2 to 3 minutes in length. I think technically microlearning is anything under 10 minutes, but we see it as small as 2 to 3 minutes. Microlearning really is a flexible solution that is in tune with how the brain works. Will microlearning trend continue? I think is an interesting question, and one that we're maybe a year or two away from finding out to see if this is a hyped up trend or if this is something that's going to continue to stick. I think it will if continued to do correctly. I do think if anything, microlearning is a learning content and technology trend that has propelled many training programs forward into thinking about accessibility. There's that word again. Into thinking about accessibility, thinking about their learners' needs, mobile readiness, and more. And microlearning really forces you to do all of those things, and that is probably going to have a much larger impact on our industry than the microlearning trend in and of itself. And John has some really great points on here. What is life without microlearning? Hoping learners would remember the training when needed and when they do an all-day training seminar. And with microlearning, there's training and performance support on demand, and as we said, kind of those smaller chunks. Remember that microlearning also doesn't have to be you do it or you don't. Many learning environments, courses and micro-learning content, they live together effectively. They serve a purpose in achieving business learning objectives. So it doesn't have to be you do this or you don't. A really good blended approach is used successfully in a lot of organizations. And I just want to end this with a quick example of how I think micro-learning kind of has come to be and how it's intended to work. So let's imagine, we've all been in this scenario. Let's imagine you're in a meeting was taking place and an attendee of that meeting heard a term they didn't understand or an acronym they didn't understand. And then they go and they Google that piece of terminology on their mobile device and gain an understanding of it, which adds value gained from the meeting for them. And then it's possible for that user to incorporate that terminology in one of their points in the next meeting later, or even in that same meeting. And this kind of rapid-fire method is an incredibly efficient way of learning. And learners have the accessibility to learn something they want in just 2 to 3 minutes, and then instantly applying it can be really effective. And this is kind of where micro-learning, I think, is really positive within an organization, especially if users are able to get to it quickly when they want to learn something quickly.
Yeah, those are all great points, Sam. All great points. I think even to pile on some of the real life examples, we're seeing so many examples now where it's about training you in real life. So when you're going after that particular knowledge, to have it there in ready to go pieces. But some really innovative things that we're seeing in like medical associations, professional associations, is medical professionals have to earn credits every year to maintain their licenses and certification. And so a way that they're doing it is bringing questions of the day or case studies that progress on a daily or a weekly basis that allow the physician in some cases to, read it, look at a picture, look at, some digital imaging and answer some questions, get some feedback, and be able to, have instructors rate that and review that over time. And so even things like that of just pushing it out a little bit every day so that learning is more of a lifelong type activity, and micro is the only way you could do that. Imagine if you told everybody they had to do an hour a day, there'd be a revolt. So,
yep, absolutely, great point.
All right, so collaborative authoring. So this is never going away. It's been around for a while, but it's sure getting better with technology. So we're going to talk about authoring in 2 ways today. First about collaborative authoring, and then a little bit later, we're going to talk about intra-LMS authoring. Here on what the difference is. But certainly we all use the normal tools over the years, Articulate, Lectora, any of the normal authoring tools to create standalone content. Typically those authoring tools are downloaded to your machine. You're working individually. You can pass a file around or have a shared file, but it's pretty much a standalone event. So most of the organization of instructional design, what your graphic artists are doing, and actually putting it into the authoring tool, a lot of times they're handled by different people or a team of people, but independently or sequentially. But converse to that is this concept of collaborative tools. And this is, I've been a believer in this now for 20 years, and it just keeps getting better. And I'm really excited about what I'm seeing across the industry right now. And it's because of the deployment of the cloud, or the invention or the evolution of the cloud, that you can now keep your authoring tools up in the cloud and have your whole team work on any given project at the same time. And you could have not only your internal L&D team, but also your extended team that might be, volunteer subject matter experts or paid subject matter experts, or one or many of third-party vendors. So we're seeing a lot of organizations right now have one centralized authoring tool, and they because a lot of content is more the instructional design than the production, they work with a whole series of teams, and they have them work inside their own collaborative environment. And so what that allows it to do is to have each piece of content tagged, and it can be reused and automatically updated. And it just folds in so perfectly with the whole micro-learning concept of being able to get smaller chunks of content to people, and the adaptive concept of getting those smaller chunks adapted to people, even to the concept of being able to ask questions up front, like an assessment or a survey, and have that content dynamically reorder itself at delivery time. All that's possible from collaborative authoring tools, sometimes called LCMS updates. And what's really neat about that now is that organizations are trying to find more than one ways to get their content out there, especially to their extended enterprise. Now, your employees, you typically drive to the LMS, but your customers or your channel partners or suppliers, you might have different ways to stay in touch with them, and keeping your content centralized in the cloud and pushing that out to a variety of sources, either for free or fee, is a big advantage. And so in my experience now, the largest and the most sophisticated shops are moving to this concept of really broader teams working together. So with that, we'll jump to the next one. And Sam and I both have video. So video is great. I remember one of my first projects coming right out of grad school. We worked doing education CBT for the hearing impaired using video discs, putting analog video on video disc, and you'd have to have these big record looking things that you would work with your computer program.
Oh yeah, and then you had them in big packs of 12 series, and everyone had the DVDs. I remember that well as well.
They were big. But now with the bandwidth becoming cheap and broad, concept of streaming videos and content distribution networks and video cameras on everybody's phone, video went from being something that was really expensive and prohibitive to being much more of an everyday thing inside of learning. Low production costs in a lot of cases. And additionally, they've been taking, we do a lot of work with associations that have trade shows every year, or rather annual gatherings, and they have experts speaking, and they're always videotaping that, but the video is kind of boring of just a speaker and PowerPoints up there. And so now the learning platforms and the authoring platforms are taking this video. They're allowing you to, wrap transcripts around it, kind of like lynda.com, search for the transcripts or search for any point in the video, synchronize slides, have comments or assessment questions pop up in the middle of the video, or additional resources, and give you the ability to share and edit your comments. And so there's a lot of things now that are just taken in the normal video and layering on all these capabilities. And it's exciting. Every time we do a new RFP competition, I see somebody pushing the envelope on what they're doing with video. Sam, that's primarily proprietary content that I see that happening on. On the other side of the fence, how important is video inside a curated library like yours?
Yeah, definitely. So, I could go on about this topic too, but, video is still a very vivid and entertaining way to stimulate learners' interest, and, in hopes that learners can retain the information they've been taught by, recreating the images in their mind of what they saw when they were watching it. The biggest thing in regards to, especially when you're considering when you're looking at off-the-shelf courses, or even when you're producing in-house, and we'll talk about this again, there are some requirements that must be met in order for video to be successful. First, how a video is produced. A good quality video is vital and can highly influence the way viewers receive the message. So whether you are, again, producing in-house or looking at an external vendor, there needs to be some sort of review process and what you're looking for ahead of time when reviewing a video before it goes out to your learner. The second thing to think about is features. Animation, many of our courses have features, animation, gamification, things that are, choose your own adventure. These are very popular ways video is done well to keep a learner engaged more than a classroom or even a video of a talking head for 30 minutes. I would say microlearning also falls in that category. Mm-hmm. And then, another thing about a marketplace of e-learning courses is the last two things is, not all people are the same. Some people just don't prefer video, and this can depend on a variety of different reasons. But video is more efficient when they're accompanied by transcriptions or step-by-step instructions in a PDF or a worksheet to go along with it. And many of the courses within our catalog or ones that you could make yourself along the way is highly recommended if you're thinking about, using e-learning alone, is to have this additional interactive component. And lastly, what we stress with customers, again, when looking at a marketplace, goes back to accessibility. Is the video in the native language of the learner? Does it include closed captions for those who need it? Can it be on a mobile device for those who work in a warehouse or out in the field? Video can be disastrous without the right considerations, but when done well is a very effective learning tool and style. And what is nice about when you look at a marketplace of e-learning courses is, likely there will be options in multiple languages and multiple accessibility types and closed captioning options. And those are things that a lot of people are limited when producing content in-house that we encourage everybody to think about when it comes to their learners and their learning style.
Excellent. And a comment from one of our audience member, Trevor, made the point about how video now is being integrated into the workflow. From a learner can upload it, a picture of them doing themselves. I'm working with one organization where they actually film auto body technicians performing certain tasks and uploaded that up for an instructor to analyze and provide specific feedback. So even bringing user-generated content for learning is something that we're seeing. So those are our first 5.
Awesome, great example.
Those are our first 5. So let's get another one of these up.
All right, so we have the next poll, which is just quick go ahead and answer. Which are critical content concerns for your organization? Feel free to check all that apply. We have content curation, adaptive learning, micro-learning, collaborative authoring, and videos. We're kind of going through the ones that we just talked about. What's the most critical content concern?
What's strategic? What's the shiny penny? What's strategic to your organization? All right, we see the horse race going. Numbers are changing. Give everybody 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll close that out. Speed poll in here, and we'll share it and see that it's probably not surprising. Collaborative authoring being the lowest on the list. How about that? But 63% for micro learning and content curation, of course. And adaptive learning. So not a whole lot different than what our public poll is prioritizing. All right. Well, let's go to the tier 2 ones here. Or let's go to the tier 2 and see if we get any wider spread from the audience here on some other ones. So intra-LMS authoring. So we talked about authoring tools, and we talked about the LCMSs and the collaborative authoring tools, but the trend that's gaining the most traction, in my opinion, is the intra-LMS authoring tool. And it started with academic systems where they had the concept of the flipped classrooms and giving offline assignments and using the time for your live sessions for actual teacher integration or teacher interactions and uploading assignments, and all that was in academic LMSs for a while, but it never really made it to the corporate side. But that line has really gotten foggy and gray in between the authoring capabilities in both. And the best I think of academic type authoring has been pulled into corporate systems now. And so you'll find that corporate LMSs, many of them have similar authoring type and collaborative authoring type capabilities. They allow you to create pieces of content that can be reused in one or more courses, assign things based on, or create content tied to learning objectives, tied to actual goal acquisition, to be able to, upload any type of digital file or video asset, to be able to roll these things out in small little microbursts or put them into longer programs or create whole certification paths. Intra-LMS authoring has always been good with test questions and assessments. LMS has been historically good with being able to create different 5 or 10 different question types and put questions into groups and be able to randomize from groups and randomize questions and distractors on the questions, and they can do very well. The same with surveys. But what's ended up happening is that the intra-LMS authoring content gets so blended into the learning experience that it's hard for even me who looks at LMSs every day to definitively say what's LMS and what's content authoring in these systems. And so things like, letting you preview content or decide different modules that you want to make for trial or available to the public, you can do all kinds of things that you just can't do with external authoring tools made by a different organization that's just communicating through SCORM. And so the downside of intra-LMS authoring is what happens if you need to switch your LMS, and then you have all the content inside of there. And so now even that's being addressed with the concept of exportability to SCORM content in a lot of LMS authored content, and also the concept of putting it into the SCORM cloud so that the end product resides there so that you can access that from a different LMS over time. So this was something that most organizations stayed away from, that now we see really a blend. Sure, you might want to use sophisticated tools for sophisticated content, but a lot of times intra-LMS can really be pulling together activities and pieces of content that you already have from PowerPoints, videos, and so forth, and really making it an efficient and fast, rapid way to develop content. And learning content marketplaces, number 7 here on the list. Surprisingly, it moved up to 7 because generally learning content marketplaces seem to be set in the market. It's like the early adopters got in and established their dominance, kind of like you guys. What do you think about that, Sam?
Yeah, definitely. The content marketplace is really just a single place you can go access a large library of resources, in this case, e-learning courses and learning content, in theory that have been aggregated from a variety of different places and authors, hopefully vetted, and then put in one place for you to source from. In the music world, iTunes is a marketplace. In the art world, Etsy.com is a marketplace. OpenSesame is considered a marketplace as well. I know, John, you have some kind of good points to share here about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see, in addition to, the learning marketplace like that, one of the things I do see is that's becoming in vogue is creating these marketplaces at a really specific specialty scale. So I see like one organization up, in Newfoundland, in Canada, aggregated all the compliance instructor-led training providers, of which there's hundreds, and brought them not into an electronic marketplace, but a learning marketplace where people in heavy capital industries could get safety and other types of certification from local providers. So it's just centered around specifically safety and operating type equipment. And you see the same thing from the neurological societies here in America, bringing together the different content, and not only that, industry partners all together in one marketplace, selling not only specific learning content, but ancillary materials. And so the infrastructure to create those marketplaces and deploy those at that small scale is also something that we see pretty frequently, but really on the smaller scale now. All right. But what we see on the larger scale, of course, is user-generated content. And so, when I remember when social learning came out the first time 20 years ago, and LMSs had things like coffee shops and concepts like that there, where you had the very first discussion, long before Facebook, the first discussion boards. Right away, administrators said, yeah, we could do that, but, what happens if they write bad comments, or what happens if, the content they put up there isn't good? And, maybe we should be the ones, the administrators should be the ones, keeping this populated. And so, all those programs died under the weight of that effort of having a couple people supply all the content. But then with social media, everything changed. Everybody got used to posting their own content, liking content, commenting on it, thumbs up in it, down in it, giving it star ratings, sharing it to, reporting it, all those type of things became, pretty standard in our personal lives, and, including tagging content and following tags and following users in their content. And all of that stuff now has made its way right to the forefront of learning content and learning technology to allow users to really fully interact with any content that you curated, but also anything that they've created themselves. But that brings its own set of headaches, similar to what were always there. Sam, what do you think about user-generated content in your world? Is that something that you see, or is it almost always curated from pure professionals?
Oh yeah, so we actually, in our own OpenSesame's own onboarding process, we have some user-generated content. We have all of essentially the directors of every department that has created an e-learning course overviewing their department, who the key players are, how they work with different departments, and we use those courses in our onboarding process to educate new hires on who people are in different departments and how departments work together and that sort of thing. Moving towards user-generated content is not necessary. It's not always easy. E-learning software for non-experts, I mean, my only advice is it has to be easy and intuitive to use. The program we use it comes with templates to create content, and there has to be some strong technical support from the tool provider. So my recommendation, if you're getting started with let's do some user-generated content and see how it goes, is, we tell people select tools that are easy to use, start small, maybe start with some internal webinars that you're posting on your social pages to have people comment on, and using the social media. That's one that we hear a lot and we tell people a lot too. Facilitate learners, make it easy for them to give feedback with, exactly as John said, the thumbs up or thumbs down, so that you can improve the process. Again, we do our own user-generated training, so even we do that, but it is not appropriate for all situations. The industry of the enterprise and its internal culture dictates a lot of these. But for example, safety and compliance training is typically seen as high stakes and may not want to be handed off to users. So it's kind of a use your own judgment thing. It can definitely be done really well and serve a really good purpose, and easy to update and stay relevant as things change within your organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the easy tools that I saw that I've seen is a concept of a bookmarklet, which is essentially a little add-on that you have in your Chrome or other browser. And then whenever you're surfing on a page of content, you can basically click that little button, and what that does, it saves that snippet in the URL, and it drops it right into your own page in the LMS, so that the next time you're in there, you can further share that. And so it's a way that you don't even have to be in the learning management system to be able to help aggregate that content in a really informal way. Last little point on all of this is what's really new in 2018 is just the state of our analytics and reporting. So all this user-based content before was kind of hard to sort through administratively to curate, to figure out what's appropriate, to develop any patterns or standardization, or understand, what different types of users wanted or liked. And now with just the phenomenal analytics that are available in learning technology, you can really study this user-generated content in ways to find out, what should be curated into formal content, versus, what are trends that identify what your learners actually want. And so by letting them actually get involved in the games is almost like a way of surveying and polling what they really need, because they're making up the difference for what's not out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so many customers we work with have social media to manage, promotion of content, or taking, using polls or surveying their, user base. So it's definitely a really more widely used than I think most people would think.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on. Just like we thought, Sam, we get to talking here, telling our stories. Now we're running tight on time, so we'll wrap up some of these last points here. But XAPI, so you can hardly go anywhere without thinking about XAPI or Tin Can. It's been around. It's been hailed, of course, as the successor in the industry. I just had a phenomenal podcast on the Talented Learning Show with Mike Rostisi that talked all about Watershed LRS and working with XAPI. But in general, XAPI is a way that you can track learner progress or learner completion or learner activities even broader that's much deeper than course access or just a course, but it really could be anything. And that anything could be, from reading a book to attending a show to, downloading an activity. And in a lot of ways, it's just like a CRM that it's tracking things that are non-training about a learner and allows you to then, from an analytics standpoint, combine business and non-training data with training data to help you make predictive paths and to get better content, more personalized content to folks at the right time. With that being said, at conferences, the XAPI, how to create it, sessions are packed. But from an LMS selection standpoint, where I see it most often, I hear, my buyers, LMS buyers saying, yes, we want to support API. And I say, great, what are you doing in it? And it's like, well, not much yet. And so it's like they know they need it. They know it's coming. It looks like developers are using it. But, in my world, it's not like a mandatory every time, it feels like. And so I'm curious to see what it's like in your world. How is it everything XAPI now in your library? Are organizations slow to adapt to that? What's going on?
Yeah, no, I mean, SCORM has served us well, but it doesn't really capture the entire picture of e-learning. So I agree with everything you've said here. I thought you summarized it nicely. OpenSesame has a strict set of course quality standards that we adhere to for our marketplace. It's quite a long list, but all courses must be SCORM or XAPI compliant. So we're not necessarily, it's not all XAPI. But we can convert a SCORM or an AICC result to XAPI format to send to your learning record store. So we are able to do some integrations that way. But again, XAPI is really the best way to see that learning is happening everywhere, not just in the SCORM courses in a traditional LMS, and that this gives you the ability to see a much larger picture.
Interesting. Yeah, in my experience, I think XAPI seems to be much more prevalent and common in employee learning and those that are delivering learning to employees. But when I find that you extend out and you're delivering learning to customers or channel partners or association members, XAPI becomes a secondary consideration at this point.
Interesting.
Yeah. And last, but certainly not least from a top 10 standpoint, is extended enterprise content strategy. So my whole career in learning technology, more specifically, has been focused on extended enterprise, which is the concept of not just training your employees, but holistically across your channel partners, franchises, distributors, suppliers, customers, or prospective customers. And, what I found all through my career and certainly now is that organizations, ones that are strategic, think about all these groups as one, not as one, but at the same time, and the needs of them at the same time, and develop learning platforms that support them all uniquely but individually, but at the same time provide some economies of scale. And what I've seen is a trend over the years away from these centralized strategies where organizations, the customer learning group might just go off by themselves and buy a cloud-based system and, not tell HR and training. And so what's happening is that organizations seem to get a lot of these different silos, department or development silos, depending on the business unit or employee or audience of their learning. And so content gets developed multiple times. Now, customer learning content is always, things that you can buy off the shelf or from content marketplaces in most times. But customer learning content, very rarely do you buy, a management course to give to your customers, or very rarely do you, buy a first aid course to give to a partner. But what you do is there's an intersection between partner content, customer content, and employee content. And that star area, that gold star, is the proprietary content that's common to all three of those groups. And it's typically about an organization's products or services or support that nobody else can make that content for them. You're not going to find it off the shelf. It's always about your organization. So from a content strategy standpoint, one of the things that the most progressive and smart organizations are doing is looking at that content strategy holistically and finding out where those common gold star proprietary areas are and develop them in common, either using that collaborative authoring tool and serving up to the different systems, or ideally putting in an enterprise LMS that's able to manage those different groups and common content and disparate content all at the same time. So that's where I see a lot of organizations spending time, money, and effort is trying to sort through that. And it's a great place that strategically you'll find a lot of value in your organization. All right, super speed poll. Last one as we're
All right, poll number 3. Which are critical content concerns for organizations? The same as previous question, and go through the ones we just talked about: intra-LMS authoring, learning content marketplaces, user-generated content, XAPI, and extended enterprise content strategy. So real quick answers. You can select all that apply to you. Which are critical content concerns? Ooh, say that 10 times fast.
Say that fast. All right. Well, good. It's all over. It's all over the board here. Kind of spread equally
Interesting.
Across, but still 36% for XAPI. I was talking bad about it, but still did pretty good. But user-generated content seems to be the one most organizations want to get their heads around, and I can see why, because it's certainly not easy to do so. So how about a couple slides here and we'll wrap it up.
Yep, so I know we're running short on time. So regarding the idea of buy versus build, I have this great chart up here that we use with a lot of folks. It just is to kind of show a way to think about that question: do we buy or do we build? With the question number 1 being, how unique is the content to your company? And then question number 2, what resources do you have in-house to create the content? And if the content you plan to deliver is very specific to your company, like the example I gave earlier regarding our user-generated content, then the company should definitely be involved in creating the content, and a custom approach is generally called for. And as the top row of this above grid suggests, the extent of your involvement depends on the answer to question number 2 about internal resources. So if you've concluded it's unique to your company, then you need to take a hard look at your internal resources and expertise. Not just money and time, but also, do you have the technical know-how you need to put together effective training materials yourself? And this is more than just putting a video camera at the back of the room and pressing record. Thinking about all of the concise and compelling ways to make your course ready for your learners. And then on the second slide here, I won't go into this, but Donald Taylor, he's the chairman for the Learning and Performance Institute. He's come up with a learning content pyramid that I suggest everyone look into, that just talks about relevancy of content and how what's at the bottom is highly accessible, generally free, and what's at the top is incredibly unique to your organization, and different considerations to take for each. So suggest you guys kind of look into that.
Combining Taylor's model and ours, this would be the gold star content. What's that? Externally commissioned. So, aligning your content with your, as you evaluate that strategy, you can't do everything for all your audiences. You have to really pare it down and look where you want to change behavior. And so the first part is really starting with the analysis of the different types of learning audiences that you have and the metrics that you want to change, and to get content and to source it and test it on a limited basis, and to continually measure and improve based on that. If it's successful, you expand it. If it's not, you don't. But you shouldn't try to tackle it or bite it all off at once, or otherwise you must certainly fail. It's a continual rollout, and I think if anything of today's presentation has taught me in preparing for it and delivering it is that the content topics, though they change and the technology changes, this test on a limited basis, is some tried and true knowledge that applies to matter what year you're in or what technology as a way to core and explore of what works for your organization, and really measuring it in an A/B way. And so in extended enterprise anyway, we have it so easy. We could just take groups of trained people and say, these customers were trained and these customers didn't. Now let's look in the CRM and see how they behaved. Did they buy more or less? Did they use their product more or less? Did they renew more or less? You can see all of these things and just combine those that have taken and those that haven't taken training and see what the effectiveness is. And so that's the basis of any model of measuring the effectiveness is just to see one from a survey and two from an actual performance in your CRM or ERP of what business things have changed. So at the end of the day, we covered a lot of ground today on what's going on historically and currently inside the learning technology content marketplace. For sure, there's always going to be shiny pennies and sizzle out there, but it's really about strategy and stake of finding what you need to change and what behavior. It's no longer good enough just to put anything out there and just hope people will sort through it themselves. You're too busy, plus everybody's too spoiled with Google and the modern world of online living that nobody wants to spend their time doing that anymore. So curating the right content and going from courses to resources to doing it strategically by group, by being very smart and deliberate about how you aggregate, how you think about that pyramid of what you buy, what's freely accessible, what you outsource. Is all part of a core strategy to be great in the learning world. And no matter what, it's always about predicting, measuring, and continuously improving. And that can only be done through lots of learner input and lots of measurement and strategy. And so, Sam, thanks so much for joining today and sharing your expertise. I learned a ton, both in our prep sessions and today, listening to you tell your stories and share. And so thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Very entertaining webinar, and look forward to doing another one or following up.
All right. And so we'll go ahead and produce the on-demand version, and I'll send that out to you all personally here so that you can access that in the Talented Learning Center, which is our repository of our on-demand webinars. You can contact me or Sam either at johnlay@talentedlearning.com or samantha.marsden at OpenSesame.com for any questions or follow-up. If we happen to not get to your question today, we'll go ahead and thread an answer back to you. And then once again, reach out to me if you want any credit for this for your ASEE credit. So thanks again for attending a Talented Learning sponsored or hosted webinar. And thanks for OpenSesame for the sponsorship. And thank you for attending from all over the world. We look forward to seeing you on our next one. And you can find more of our resources at talentedlearning.com. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Bye, everyone.